Welcome to our third panel, which is entitled Shaping and Adjusting NATO Energy Security Policy in the Region. I have been given strict instructions from the organizers and the participants to sort of adhere to a time schedule. So I will request our speakers to limit their presentations to between 10 and 12 minutes, and then we'll have about 5 minutes for questions following each presentation. We have 5 presentations this session, and I think we could just go in the prescribed order, beginning with Remigius Zilinskas, NATO Energy Security Center for Excellence, whose presentation is entitled Exploring the Potential for NATO Practical Input in Regional Energy Security.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Chairman, for presenting me and giving a time. So, as an active military, I'll try to be an example for others. If I fail, then I will be punished. I'm a military academician from NATO Energy Security Center, also a PhD student at Military Academy and Vytautas Magnus University in Lithuania. So the aim of my presentation to provide you some assessment on real added value, what can be done, on the from a practical point, what NATO can add to regional security with some, practical tool, not just a discussion or some, interesting points. So, but first of all, before starting, we need to understand what does it mean, what we are talking about, what is energy security, and what is in NATO, and then we can move to the region. So, defining energy security is very difficult. We just had a wonderful session from TSO perspective. So for them is mainly security of supply, but for others, yes, it's security of demand. So it means availability of resources. So, in Lithuania, for example, we built the LNG terminal, and we pay more than it's, let's say, we can get price better on the market, but we pay for security. We understand that, and we knew that in advance. And for NATO, and might be it's not a strategic commodity, and also crucial for operational tempo. So without energy, armed forces cannot move. There is no war can be done. So once Aristotle told his fellows that who controls definition control the debate. So it means that we need to understand what does it mean. However, in NATO, and to some extent to EU, less, of course, the politicians, bureaucrats, they do not want to define what is energy security, and it's caused some problems, some concerns for academic world. So it's even also is a discussion with more than 45 definitions. So we heard in the beginning of today the Americans' perspective. So it's more resilience perspective, but there is a more and more. There is International Energy Agency and others. So how NATO came across the issue. So even Article 5 talks about energy security somehow in brackets, because NATO, that is political military alliance. Yes, with some 2 important parts. First of all, the main part during Cold War was NATO pipeline system, and specifically Central European pipeline system. And see the Georgia. So it's important to know that this existing now, and for example, Frankfurt Airport is using air fuel from this system now. Yes, It's, of course, now it's at the commercial, somehow, let's say, auspicity. That OPEC oil embargo, also it was a part of security. Then 9/11 started, from my perspective, the debates in NATO back in 2011. It was first debates. And the Ukraine oil crisis, energy as a weapon, OPEC deal 2016, we don't know what happens, but nothing serious, because I just read that oil getting down again, because in US they open new drilling, new oil drills. So. Okay, so in NATO, officially, there is 3 lines of 3 areas where NATO works on: enhancing strategic awareness, it's a political strategic level, then increasing competence and enhancing resilience against energy supply disruption. So this is strategic operational level. And the third is the least one, operational tactical level, is improving energy efficiency of military forces. Here, as far as I know, this part is not very, very popular. So that's why I will try to concentrate on these 2, on the suggestion of the cooperation. So basically, if we squeeze these 3 lines, we see some small efforts, lines of efforts. And in this part, you see the green one, so cooperation with other institutions, and the yellowish, there are some problems, let's say. Intel sharing is nice wording. Everyone is saying, okay, share information, but if you want to get real information on the infrastructure, on some really data, you can have problems, really. There are some tools, but the same goes with the second pillar. Advanced planning, now with this resilience building, starting to think how, okay, peacetime, nice. These wonderful guys working, pipelines building, but if crisis comes, so who will own that? If military comes, or wants to, okay, has to fight, and destroy everything, take control. So this advanced planning, that's why I asked about crisis management. It's going on something, or you just, leave it and think for the better future. It's good, but I assume that we have to have advanced planning in our mind and also in practice. And the third one is energy efficiency. So standardization is a big problem in NATO. Energy efficient solution exists, and education training also going on. So we are working on standardization for the time being in Center and in NATO. So there are 2 red lines that NATO cannot cross. So I think this is very important point, that you understand that NATO is not a distributor of energy. This is not an energy agency, not European Commission. This is political military alliance with some interest, strategic interest, and energy security is one of them. So no duplication of other actors' role and responsibilities. So no cooperation, but not doing the same job as European Commission does or other things. And second is no interference with national energy policy. So NATO cannot tell Germany to revert the policy from green and come back to the nuclear energy, for example. In NATO structure framework, there are 5 main institutions. So first of all is a Emerging Security Challenge Division, was established in 2012. They dealing with policy. So basically, if a partnership in this let's say pillar or framework, then ACT dealing with concept, shape, education, training is a NATO business, and then comes NSEC-COE, NATO Energy Security Center of Excellence. It's a multinational military institution, and Georgia is a part of it. So the partners can participate in a framework of NATO energy security issues. And Science of Technology, NSPA, NATO Supply Agency, is the organization that's dealing specifically with some specific projects. And 6UE, I will not go deep, I don't have time, and these are not a main aim to present the center. That from our point of view, and 6UE is the good platform, outreach platform, networking platform, because we are flexible institution. Of course, we are, let's say, accountable to steering committee, so nations who created the center, but we are not NATO command structure, so it means we can have a easier discussion with partners and contribute to the regional security. So this kind of structure, we call it resilient energy triangle, golden triangle for regional cooperation. And so these 5, maybe more, areas, from our perspective, we can find gaps, or we can facilitate the regional cooperation. So civil preparedness, now very, very sexy in NATO, and I'll tell you the next, last slide, Chairman. So, questions does not include. Research experiment analysis, so we do studies, feasibility studies, and from Ukraine, for example, lessons learned. Ukraine just issued green framework on critical infrastructure protection, 25, 30 pages of a good paper. So I think it's one of the ways to proceed. Information intelligence sharing, networking also very important, but it's, as I said, it's an issue also in NATO. So information sharing is very challenging, but it's doable, I think. Education and training, and I will touch in the next slide. Monitoring, assessment, all these, what was presented, all the projects, For example, I had questions, we don't have time, For example, the economical value, There are so really interesting points, Why so many projects goes to Europe if Europe is reducing the gas consumption, for example. For 5 years, the gas consumption is not increasing. And for example, in Lithuania, we have Euro directive for energy efficient houses. Myself, I'm building A+ house. It means there no gas. I will not use gas. So for 5 years, with no gas at all. Sorry. So I'm just considering this. That you have to consider that national policies on energy efficiency as well. Okay. So what we can propose, let's say. To region. So regional annual energy program course, what was done in Georgia, first time in region, April, I was co-director of this course, and next year will be another course, and now with our partners and host, Delta Scientific Military Companies, we trying to increase, and Georgia might become a regional education on let's say strategic level, and they try to invite the Azeris, Kazakhstan representatives from Turkey, from Armenia. I mean, we want to cover the region and to present some new updates. And some people we met in March, and we visited also electricity grids, and hubs. Okay. Tabletop exercise with regional scenario on critical energy infrastructure protection and resilience building. Now we are planning this kind of exercise in Ukraine on the hybrid scenario. So maybe we can do it also in the region. Yes, thank you very much. So I'm almost on time. So we are also developing the scenario, if I'm right. Is strategic analysis and research very, very much involved in support of Ukraine studies. And the green paper, as I mentioned, also feasibility study of energy in conflict on hybrid warfare. It also might be a, let's say, food for thought in the future. And the last but not least, civil-military emergency planning experience. Just 2 months ago, the same SPS, 9 Science for Peace, was in Montenegro was done. Yeah, workshop for civil preparedness for Balkans, and see the picture they did, planning to implement some computer programs, disaster, natural, of course, but also it can be used for some hybrid threats scenarios. So thank you very much. So 30 seconds out of time, so I'm ready for punishment. So thank you very much. So.
Thank you, Mr. Zinskas, for opening the discussion on this most important topic and for sticking to your time. The floor is now open for questions. Yes, sir.
From the European Geopolitical Forum in Brussels. Thank you very much for your presentation. Very interesting activity your Center of Excellence has. I'm curious about this training program or course that you organize. This is, understand, it's for one country at a time. It's not something which is a regional course. Could you please tell us more about what topics are you covering? Are they only NATO related? I mean, only about what NATO is doing in energy security, or is also providing a more general background of information about energy security and setting up the role of NATO within this broader picture? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chairman, are we collecting all the questions and then, I will shoot?
Perhaps we can take 2 more questions, brief questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Nika Chitadze. I represent the International Black Sea University, Tbilisi, Georgia. We are talking about NATO energy security. Mostly you were focused on the regional projects, but with your permission, I have a question related to the transatlantic cooperation in the field of energy between NATO member countries. I mean, here the possibilities of the export of shale gas from the United States of America to Europe, because we know that today the United States of America is at the first place according to the production of natural gas. From the other side, we know that the European Union is still dependent on Russian Federation, which exports about 130 billion cubic meters of natural gas per year. So at the same time, before the Riga summit in NATO in 2006, Senator Richard Lugar mentioned, about the introduction of the 5th article of NATO in practice, really, in the field of the energy security. Your point of view about it. Thank you in advance for your answer.
That's it, yeah? Okay. Thank you. Very good question. On the first question, so we have, in fact, 2 courses. One is a NATO accredited course on a strategic level in NATO School of Beramergao, and this year is the 2nd year, the 2 iterations already done. So this year was like 14 participants from partners country. Last year was 5 representatives from Georgia. So this is basically NATO. So what is NATO doing? And also, of course, NATO interest, ISIS, energy conflict. In Georgia, they specifically focus on regional issues. So it means some presentations we have already seen, so was done in that course. So it means a BP was present, transmission operators were present, governmental institution deputy of energy minister was delivering Georgian energy policy guidance. So it means this course is specifically that, not to duplicate, and let's say avoid these discrepancies, between courses, because we need to balance, you cannot, say the same things. On the second, as I mentioned, we are not dealing, we are dealing on research and analysis. So maybe my colleague Arturas also touched this issue, but on the second, you told, just please remind the second part on the...
How the European Union is dependent, the NATO partners are dependent on Russia, how to avoid it by, for example, increasing the import of natural gas from the United States of America, shale gas and gas.
Okay, so I can answer only from my point of view. the first thing what you have to do, so we have to sign the EU-US treaty. First of all, it's a first step, and then to proceed with other things, as far as I know, the gas from US is already coming. The first tanker, if I'm not mistaken, came 2 or 3 months, reached some ports in Europe.
In France.
In France, yes. Yes, yeah, exactly. Thank you. So it means it's coming, but not in that huge extent. How to do it? I don't know. There are two ways. First, increase, let's say, diversity. So we have more projects, but really with economic benefits. Then the prices gets down, and the dependency gets. We will have a less dependent situation on Russia. And the second is, I don't know, just do like Lithuania does, just to pay for the security. So it means they build the second option, and you have LNG terminal, for example, and then you can have option 2 and get the gas from Qatar, for example, as we do. Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's now turn to our second speaker, Dr. Emmanuel Karajanis, who is going to speak to us about jihadi strategies and tactics against the CEI in the Caucasus region and beyond. Dr. Karajanis is a political scientist and a senior lecturer at King's College.
Right. Good afternoon. Thank you, first of all, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. First time I came to Georgia was 1995. So last night when the taxi driver from the airport took me to the hotel, I couldn't recognize the country, to be honest with you. So it looks like a very different country. But no matter how many changes we had in Georgia, Georgia is still part of the Caucasus region. Yes, it's not part of Scandinavia, it's not part of, I don't know, South Europe. So this is a region full of problems. And my pessimistic presentation today will be about jihadi strategies and tactics against critical energy infrastructure in the Caucasus, but also beyond the Caucasus. So let me start with some basic information. If I can, yes, no, this, no, yes, okay. Okay, great, thank you. All right, so let's start with some very basic information about the Muslim world and energy. So OPEC is basically a Muslim majority organization. Of course, there are countries like Ecuador, Nigeria, Indonesia used to be a member of OPEC, but most of OPEC member states are, of course, Muslim majority countries. It doesn't make any difference, but I just want to emphasize that when it comes to energy, when it comes to oil and gas, Muslim societies and jihadi groups are, let's say, a byproduct of those societies, are very familiar with oil and gas. Let's say that they have an oil and gas education. They understand what is oil and gas about. And of course, the most important producers, apart from Russia, are usually Muslim majority countries like Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, Kuwait, etc. And 2/3 of all oil reserves are located in Muslim territories, Muslim countries. And Iran and Qatar are the two most important gas producers after Russia. So, what about the Islamic perspective on energy? Do we know anything about how Islam understands energy issues? And by Islam, I mean theologically speaking. So, we cannot find anything in the Holy Quran. We cannot find anything relating to energy issues in the Holy Quran. Guess why? Because the Holy Quran was, produced, written, published, given by God to the Muslims 1,300 years ago. But we still have some hadiths. Hadiths are, let's say, a collection of oral stories about the life of Prophet Muhammad. So we have a hadith stating that Muslims are partners in three things: water, green pastures, and fire. Now, by fire, al-nar in Arabic, most ulama will understand any resources that can generate energy, meaning what? Oil and gas. So we have something coming, let's say, from the Islamic theology, and today I will focus only on the Sunni denomination, because we don't have the time to discuss the Shia perspective. So in Sunni Islam, we have, let's say, four major schools of jurisprudence. So only two of them, the Maliki school and the Hanafi school, have something to say about the management of resources, the management of minerals. So from the Maliki school of jurisprudence, I know that most of you don't understand what is the Maliki school of jurisprudence, but maybe I can elaborate later on. So let's say that it's a version of Sunni Islam. Minerals cannot be privately owned. So Muslims and Muslim societies must always have ownership over oil and gas. The Hanafi school of jurisprudence, let's say that most Turks and Muslims in the former Soviet Union will follow the Hanafi school of jurisprudence, apart from your neighbors, the Azeris, that they tend to be Shia. So from the Hanafi school of jurisprudence, individuals can own minerals as long as they pay royalties. I will skip this. So this is about how different Islamic scholars understand energy issues. We don't have the time, and now I will move to Al-Qaeda. So you are all familiar with Al-Qaeda. I'm trying to save time here. I'm desperate. So I will skip this. Okay, you know what's Al-Qaeda. You know Osama bin Laden. You know what happened there. Okay, so the North Caucasus. Just to get into the mood, we have oil and gas pipelines there. Some visual images. Okay, this is probably the most dangerous jihadi group in the North Caucasus, the Emirate of North Caucasus, which is part of the ISIS network. It used to be an Al-Qaeda affiliated organization, but they switched to ISIS. An explosion. Okay. So we can understand the Al-Qaeda energy strategy from three different sources. Okay, because I'm an academic, I need sources. So first of all, we have Osama bin Laden statements, videos. So Osama bin Laden used to criticize the USA foreign policy in the Middle East, claiming that it's all about oil. And of course, another, let's say, criticism was against Arab governments, that they are so corrupted because they make so much money from oil and gas. But we have two documents that can give us an indication about how Al-Qaeda and how Al-Qaeda affiliated groups understand critical energy infrastructure. One is from Sheikh Abdullah bin Nasir al-Rashid, that was produced in 2004. So that was, let's say, an internal document advising jihadis on attacks against energy infrastructure. So, first of all, the targeting of oil infrastructure, oil and gas infrastructure, is a legitimate means of economic jihad, so it's fine to attack energy infrastructure. Even if foreign companies, by infidels, we understand foreign companies, Western corporations, even if they possess, they own oil and gas fields, this is not their property, it's our property, so we can do whatever we want. But bearing in mind that most Muslim societies, or let's say many Muslim societies and Muslim economies depend too much on oil and gas, there was something like a strategic calculation at that point that, okay, as jihadis, we will attack energy infrastructure only if it makes sense. Okay? So if we destroy a refinery, I don't know, in Mali, and we have so many locals there that they depend on this refinery for their jobs, we're not going to do this because we will lose support. So there is a rational calculation there. So we will attack as long as the benefits outweigh the cost of such an action. And okay, there is some conceptualization, let's say, about the destruction of that Muslim property. Yes, energy infrastructure, it's a Muslim property. So there are four types of oil-related interests that can be attacked. Oil and gas interests. First of all, wells, pipelines, facilities, and energy business executives, so kidnappings, basically. To sum up, energy industry is a legitimate target, and he even claimed in that document that this strategy of targeting would resemble the so-called Medinan strategy. So, I will open a very quick parenthesis here. When Prophet Muhammad left Mecca and went to Medina, there was a war from the Muslim community against Mecca. So one of the things that the Prophet Muhammad was doing was to attack the caravans coming from Mecca. And that was in order to destroy the Meccan economy. So the jihadis were trying to find some resemblance, some good examples from the early Islamic history to justify the targeting of oil and gas infrastructure. And the goal is to disrupt the market. It's not to destroy everything. So the aim is to disrupt the market so that the local governments, the local regimes will feel the pain, and the Westerners will lose access to oil and gas. There is another document. This is a very famous blueprint about, it was, again, an eternal document, but it was a blueprint about how Al-Qaeda can win the war and establish a caliphate. So Abu Bakr Naji wrote this famous document, The Management of Savagery, and he claimed that the ultimate goal is to make America bleed. Pipelines, it's a legitimate target, but we have to inform our audience about why we want to do this, otherwise we will lose the propaganda war. So, 4 reasons why jihadis are interested in critical energy infrastructure. First of all, it's a religious duty. They will have to take a position. Secondly, Muslims have suffered from many energy-related problems, including corruption, including pollution. So that means that they have an audience, and they will have to address that audience over many, many issues, including energy. Attacks can be used as an economic weapon against the West and its Arab allies. And something that I would have loved to tell you more, but I don't have the time, is that such a strategy can bridge ideological gaps between jihadis and other anti-Western forces. So let's go to the hard data. Okay, this is my study. So for the last, not for the last 10 years, from 9/11 to end of 2011, we had 223 jihadi attacks against energy infrastructure in the Middle East, former Soviet Union, etc., etc. Now, according to my study on this, 52% of all attacks were against pipelines or pipeline-related targets, like, for example, security personnel, gardening, pipelines. The most dangerous country when it comes to attacks against critical energy infrastructure was, of course, Iraq. And then was neighboring Russia, and then Yemen, Algeria, etc., etc. So this is from the Global Terrorist Database. And I'm concluding. Okay, so how can we manage jihadi threats against critical energy infrastructure? We need three things. First of all, to have a threat assessment. So we'll have to understand where and why, okay? And where the terrain, where the geography will permit such a strategy, and when the social conditions also will allow groups to function. Another thing that we need, I don't know how can I close this, but it's intelligence gathering. So we have to use human intelligence. This is very important. Maybe I can elaborate more later on. And of course, we have to take some security measures. I will mention very briefly only one thing: drones. We have to use drones when it comes to protecting pipelines. To conclude, jihadi groups have paid growing attention to energy issues. It's going to get worse. Why? Because energy infrastructure is very static. It's very easy, when it comes to the targeting. And it's not so easy to defend critical energy infrastructure. And what we need, basically, it's an integrated approach with 3 pillars that I just mentioned 1 minute ago.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, the floor is open for questions.
Thank you very much. With your permission, I have a question about one of the main reasons of us increasing the role of so-called Islamic State.
Yes.
Because we know that in 2014, so-called Islamic State was controlling about 11 regions on the territory of Syria and Iraq. And at the same time, if I'm not mistaken, the so-called Islamic State on the territory under the control of it was producing about 80,000 barrels of oil per day. And accordingly, profit of the so-called Islamic State, it was about $2 million per day. No, unfortunately, today you know that it is gradually decreasing the influence of so-called Islamic State. But your point of view, one of the main reasons of the so-called foundation of Islamic State, was it the energy or not? Because they hoped somehow to control the oil fields on the territory of Iraq. Iraq is one of the leading oil producer state in the world. As we know, the potential reserves of Iraq, if I'm not mistaken, they are estimated in about 15 billion tons of oil. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Giedrius Česnakas, Lietuvos Magnos University, Lithuania. The colleague mentioned about 2 millions that basically terrorist Islamic State earns. But who buys that oil? How it gets to the market? This is the core issue. Because fighting, terrorism, you should cut off the financing. So where the oil ends and, whom we should address. And I think this is a NATO issue as well.
Thank you. I think we have a final question in the back.
Hi, I'm from Austria. I'm very pleased with your optimism. I have one question, actually. I worked myself in HUMINT for quite a decade, I would say. I would love to get some elaboration on this part, because I broke off some of my teeth to get some insights when it comes to preventive measures.
What is the question? Sorry.
In what way because one of your pillars is increase HUMINT.
Yes.
To prevent attacks.
Yes.
I mean, I knew a lot of incidents where HUMINT helped to cover up the aftermath, yes. But I mean, it was hardly possible to get any insights in terms of prevention measures. And my experience was the only chance to prevent something is to have well-trained guards, rather than well-equipped intelligence.
All right, great. Okay. Now about ISIS, this is okay. Of course, there is a connection, but what you are asking means something else now. It's not about critical energy infrastructure. It's about how ISIS has used the local oil and gas industry to make a profit and support its operations. Yes. Okay. There is no oil conspiracy behind ISIS. Forget about oil conspiracies, okay? We are dealing with a group that is becoming a semi-state actor. It's not a non-state actor anymore. Al-Qaeda was a non-state actor, okay? We have a group that controls territory. And at some point, there were 8 million people living under the control of ISIS. So they had to manage the situation, basically. They had, they had to build policies, an education policy, a health policy, a taxation policy. So one of the things they did when they occupy parts of Syria and Iraq, but mostly Syria, the eastern part of Syria, they took over some operations there. They start exploiting the oil. Now, how they did it, I don't know. How will I know? But what we know for sure is that they sold most of this oil. Sometimes it was crude oil, sometimes it was gasoline, either to middlemen that will take this to Turkey, or some other middlemen that will take this to Jordan, or even to businessmen that are pro-Assad, let's say. Pro-regime businessmen will have bought some of this oil, because a war, apart from all the terrible things, it's also a good time for businesses. You can become rich, yes? So this is my answer to you, and maybe we can discuss it later on, because I don't think we have much time. Now, about human intelligence, the only thing that I can tell you is that we need to have the support of local communities. It's impossible to protect critical energy infrastructure 24 hours, everywhere, all the time. This is impossible. So we need support from the local communities. The local communities will know for sure if there are some strangers that they walk around and they try to understand what's going on. They will give us all the intelligence. We don't need the James Bond here. You know what I mean? We just need, if we are companies or governments, to get along with the communities and the communities to understand the benefits of having energy infrastructure in their, let's say, territory. This is my only big advice.
But it even doesn't work in Brussels.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to work all the time. If it was all the time, you wouldn't have me here, and you wouldn't have NATO guys. You would have go out of business. No, this is the world. I mean, but we can improve our capabilities. We can improve our capabilities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Manas. Our next talk is entitled The Dynamics and Trends of Conflict and Cooperation in the Caspian, presented by Dr. Nicola Contesi from Nazarbayev University.
So good afternoon, very glad to be here, so thanks for the invitation. So when it comes to energy flows over the South Caucasus, this is really intimately tied to the Caspian, of course. So what I want to do, what I'm interested in doing in this presentation is to take a look at some of the recent developments upstream and what these might also signify going forward. So so basically, okay, the Caspian is, of course, a large, very highly strategic basin. It not only for in terms of Europe's energy diversification, I don't need to go into detail, has already been addressed extensively in terms of global energy security, of course, but also in terms as a transport hub for both Trasica corridors and north-south corridors. To one extent or another, they gravitate around the Caspian. And lastly, not to forget, of course, the Caspian also is the world's caviar powerhouse, right? So now, if there is an issue, a Caspian issue today, this is because 25 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, property rights or sovereign rights remain contested. This is because following the collapse of the Soviet Union, the free post-Soviet Caspian states, so Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, denounced the 1921 and 1940 Soviet-Iranian treaties that had, until then, regulated the Caspian. What ensued was a rather interesting debate on whether the Caspian itself should be classified as a lake or a sea, with the implication that whichever definition would be adopted, this would then determine the type of the body of international law that would be used to demarcate the sea itself. However, legal scholars then agreed that this was really a rather futile debate in the sense that for a number of reasons. On one hand, it's because regional custom had long been, had never really adhered to strictly to either one or the other definition. Also, for another perspective, highlighted the fact that a number of international shipping conventions concluded within the International Maritime Organization, they had already clarified the status of the Caspian as essentially a lake. And so this whole debate really was settled from the beginning, from this perspective. And so the truth is that whatever legal status, whatever legal settlement will be taken in the Caspian, this is entirely up to the states to determine that whatever arrangement they really desire. Even though we still don't have a final, conclusive, comprehensive arrangement in the Caspian, over the 25 years that have lapsed so far, a de facto legal regime has indeed come into being in one way or another. And this is essentially based on the principle of common waters, divided bottom, that was initially proposed by Russia in the mid-90s. And this is the result essentially of bilateral agreement that have been reached between the three northern Caspian states, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, and Russia, most recently joined by Turkmenistan, who has agreed on a demarcation line with Kazakhstan in 2014, as well as a number of multilateral conventions regulating matters other than the seabed. And among these, we should consider the 2003 Caspian Sea Environmental Convention, as well as 2010 Baku Agreement on Security Cooperation. Now, in this respect, the Astrakhan Summit of 2014 was significant because for a number of reasons. On one hand, it adopted 3 additional technical agreements on emergency prevention, hydrometeorology, the preservation and rational use of water biological resources. But it also agreed on 3 additional principles that will probably then be incorporated in one way or another in a eventual convention. So the one that attracted most attention at the time was the so-called exclusivity clause that restricts merchant and military shipping to littoral state, which, by the way, was really a reiteration of a notion that had already been adopted in 2010. A further principle was that of limiting military naval construction to reasonable sizes, reasonable measures, as a way of building confidence in the area. And lastly, the principle that is, in my view, most significant is the delimitation of waters, based on a 15 plus 25 nautical miles formula, which essentially stipulates a legal regime for the waters that is already separated from the seabed. And so in that sense, in some way strengthens that common sea divided seabed, divided bottom principle. And the 3 main issues that remain outstanding are competing claims, mostly concerning the southern portion of the Caspian between Azerbaijan and Iran. The Alborz Alov oil field is crux of is an important area of disagreement, as well as between Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan, the Kiapaz or Serdar oil field. Iran's fairly inflexible position is another aspect that remains to be settled, even though Iran today remains the the only country that sort of sings out of the choir, and so in this sense, its opposition itself has been significantly weakened over the time. And lastly, there's the issue of pipelines, and this is intimately tied to ecological concerns, and so on. So at this point, some of the recent developments that have been taking place since Astrakhan show us a certain degree of progress being made towards a legal settlement. So, as I mentioned earlier, Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan agreed on the demarcation of the seabed between them, deferring the conclusion of the outward frontier with Azerbaijan to the eventual conclusion of a bilateral agreement between Turkmenistan and Azerbaijan. Russia and Kazakhstan have amended their 1998 agreement to move towards joint exploitation of overlapping oil fields. And so this is also a significant aspect that might inspire the settlement of the other two contested frontiers. In addition, the 45th meeting in June 2016, the 45th meeting of the working group of Caspian states, has formulated a number of additional principles on navigation and seabed demarcation that were added to the draft convention. And lastly, a further point was the trilateral meeting between Russia, Azerbaijan, and Iran in August 2016 that basically released an issue that a communique on the legal status, but also discussed a number of aspects related to transport, investments, and oil and gas, which may suggest that a number of incentives have been laid out in order to arrive at ultimately at a conclusion of the dispute there. And so this raises a puzzle essentially as to whether the Azerbaijani and Turkmenistan and Azerbaijani and Iran disputed oil fields will eventually be turned to joint exploitation. So I think I'm running out of time, so I'm going to skip these elements, these parts. So, and the question I want to that all this raises is, are we moving towards a final settlement? The fifth summit of Caspian states is scheduled to take place in Astana in 2017. And so it is interesting to consider whether this will finally reach the comprehensive agreement that has been expected all this time. Already after Astrakhan, many participants displayed a certain degree of optimism, which has been reiterated in the years that followed between 2014 and 2016 and today. So we have a number of high-level participants from Iran, Azerbaijan, and Russia that all express rather sanguine views on the possibility of such an agreement. At the same time, however, the Astana summit was initially scheduled to take place in 2016, and it was deferred for reasons that remain unknown. And on top of that, signature of a comprehensive agreement had already been considered to be forthcoming in the past, so in 2010 after the Baku summit, and as well as in 2013. So I'm going to leave it there, and thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Contesi. I think we have time for 2 questions.
Thank you very much. My question is, so from geographical point of view, yes, Caspian Sea, despite the fact that it is called the sea, it has no exit to the world ocean. Accordingly, it's a lake. And in this case, by this way, it should be divided by the sectoral principle, for each littoral state. But from the other side, it is because of the size of the territory, it's 371,000 square kilometers, the territory of Caspian Sea. According to the size, it can be called as a sea, or maybe from political point of view. In this case, it should be spread the Convention 1982 related to the, based on the maritime law, which determines, for example, 212 miles as the territorial zone and 200 miles as a special economic zone and continental shelf. And in your point of view, is Caspian Sea lake or sea? And in this case, how's, from the legal point of view, the problem should be resolved? Thank you very much.
Do we have another question?
Mine may be easier one. There is an obvious trend of Russia's increased activity to align economic interests with Iran, Azerbaijan, and Russia. And there has been quite a significant announcement of transportation corridor and less advertised, but also discussions of energy corridors. And the same is about Russia, Georgia, Armenia, and Iran, electricity interconnections and north-south energy access. So there's obvious activity on that direction. And what is the status? I actually would address that question to other colleagues as well. How likely it is that the interests of these countries will, to align with Russia, will be economic interests, first of all, will become strong enough that it may affect East-West corridor that we are discussing here? I think that is one of the key security threats to East-West power energy flow, and at some point I think it would be good to discuss wherever we can on each sessions. Well, I don't know who I'm addressing the question. With regards to the first question,
is it a lake or is it a sea? So as I was the main point that I wanted to make was that essentially a number of scholars have already essentially settled that matter in the sense that suggesting and pointing to a body of international law developed within the International Maritime Organization, and in particular the International Convention on Load Lines of 1966, International Convention on Tonnage Measurement of Ships of 1969, which what they do essentially, they equate the Caspian to the Great Lakes, and so, in essence, therefore, excluded from the applicability of those conventions themselves. Other views have also pointed to the fact that the 1982 convention itself does not necessarily apply here, in that the Caspian would the closest definition contained in the convention that the Caspian comes to is that of an enclosed sea, and enclosed seas have conditions that slightly derogate from the full application of the convention itself. So, so that's it. It seems to be therefore rather clearly settled in favor of the lake definition, the debate itself. So.
Great. Thank you very much. I guess we'll leave the second question for discussion at a further point in the conference. We can now turn to our next speaker, Dr. Arturas Petkes, who's Head of Strategic Analysis and Research for NATO Energy Security Center of Excellence. His talk is entitled Energy Security and Stability in the Black Sea Region, Implications from the Crimean Conflict.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, I will try to be really brief because when I look at my watch, I can see it's written coffee for audience. So sorry, I have already alarm. It's a great pleasure and privilege to present our part of our study here during this conference, despite the fact that it's a little bit further than Caucasus itself. It's neighboring area. Same time, with my presentation, I'll try to answer to some questions which were already given today. What NATO can do in terms of energy security, and also will reply to my colleague who identified some red lines. So, short structure. First of all, I'll talk a little bit about the study on hybrid warfare and critical energy infrastructure protection in Ukraine. Then some remarks on what does mean annexation of Crimea in terms of energy security for a particular country and for region. Then complexity, some aspects of complexity of energy and conflict, and we'll touch a little bit doctrines. It's not my area, but it's very interesting. So, talking about the study itself, it's a project run by NATO Energy Security Center of Excellence. At the moment, we have already several publications. One of them is Energy and Conflict series, and it's Energy and Conventional Warfare. Energy and Unconventional Warfare is under edition at the moment and will be published within 1 month, I hope. Right after New Year, the 1st of January, early morning. Other publications, we call them sardines because they are created in Strategic Analysis and Research Division, and it's informative notes on energy security. So this is abbreviation of this long sentence, and sardines are dedicated to focus on something that emerges during time being, what is important for the society, for allies, and we published one issue on cyber attacks in Ukraine. Then we had an opportunity to make research on in major part it's energy security in Crimea, but we also touched such important areas like water supply and a bridge connection to Crimea from Russia. And what we could indicate, I'll provide just some conclusions from these studies, that during 2 years, not full 2 years period, Russia managed to incorporate Crimea into Russian energy supply system. I will not go in details in all conflicts, technical, political, and military. There are a lot of aspects, but what is the fact that that this region is at the moment totally connected to Russia, and even if Ukraine would like to reconnect it, it would be challenging. What does it mean for Ukraine? I will give just one of examples, and I'm sure that Mr. Gonchar is much more aware about this than me. Crimea and Crimea gas assets. What does it mean for Ukraine? I indicated from Chernomor Neftegaz. It's already after Russian registration of the company. Actually, initially it was Chernomor Naftogaz in Ukrainian. It's Ukrainian company which was, let's say, nationalized by Russia. And now around Crimea, those assets which are offshore gas fields are explored by Russia. And saving the time, there is another map which indicates very well how the situation in this region has changed. In some discussions, I've heard the question whether offshore gas fields were the main target of annexation of Crimea. I think we could refer to a presentation of Mr. Karajanis. The main task of ISIS isn't oil itself. It's leadership in the region, and oil is just the tool. In this case, gas is also the tool, but it has two applications. First of all, it's damage for Ukrainian economy. Second one is very, very tricky thing. This gas supposed to be consumed by someone. Who will be consumer? Russia, only Russia, or someone else? Will it go? Will this molecule travel to Europe? Who will buy this gas? And if someone in Europe will buy this gas, will it support annexation of Crimea? So a lot of questions are raised in political and economical discussions at the moment, and it's quite sensitive. When we come back to NATO, how much? 4 minutes, okay. So when we come back to NATO, NATO is dedicated to ensure security and stability in the region. And economical tool is is so innocent tool to distract unity of states and regions that it's a real challenge for regional security. So what can NATO do in this regard? First of all, raise awareness, what is indicated in Warsaw Summit document, but it's already have been used for several summit documents. What does it mean? On one hand, it seems that raising awareness is, like someone today said already, it's just blah, blah, blah. I would argue with this because NATO is an organization where decisions are taken very fast. If awareness is raised effectively and sufficient. So our task is to pay attention to regional challenges and bring this information to those who are making decisions. I will not touch other issues, for instance, which are challenging countries like Bulgaria and Romania. I will just go to the final statement. Reaction to the trade in gas extracted around Crimea and sold by Russia. So what is important for NATO is the spirit of unity, and we have to support each other's efforts in ensuring stability. And it's political statement, but it's very important. Why? Because if our partners will be left in unstable situation, and they will not be sure whether we will support them or not, we can talk that, yeah, we invite you to the conference to talk and so on and so on, but practically there will be no outcome. It's gonna be very crucial for alliance itself. So what we can see that raising awareness is just the first step. Later on, some political, economical decisions should be taken. And the last sentence, there are some references which you will be able to read if the presentation will be shared. The last reference or comment to what was said before, during some presentations, it was said that what is the economical benefit from this particular project for this particular country? Sometimes Poland asked this question when Lithuania initialized electricity connection between Lithuania and Poland. Today, Poland, Lithuania, and Nordic states are able to trade in electricity, and all of them gain profit from this project. So this is the answer. And the last statement, in this project, there was no NATO. It was national effort. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Petkus. The floor is open for questions. Someone up here.
Thank you for your absolutely excellent presentation. And my question is, if you take in consideration your approach, what is your prediction for success or unsuccess for projects which we discussed it through Black Sea area. White Stream, for example, or other projects through prism of Russia activity, and we can opportunity to conclude that Russian activity is direct how to prevent implementation of different alternatives to keep dominant position. What is your opinion in this context?
Thank you.
Shall we take a few more questions?
Sure.
I'm going to use my prerogative as chair to ask you a question. So I was somewhat struck by your usage of the phrase complexity of conflict, and I'm very curious as to what, from a NATO standpoint, that might mean, and whether you actually draw on insights from complexity theory or actually use simulation to forecast different scenarios when you analyze cases like this. Given that these issues are so interlinked and so dependent, that small changes in one area could have huge ramifications across the board. I think we still have space for one final question, and there was one.
Thanks. I'm interested also about other problem related to Crimea, as we know that you mentioned here about the gas fields, but at the same time we know that Crimea before was dependent on other part of Ukraine related to the water supply. And this way, after Ukraine, after the occupation of Crimea, if you have any information about it, that Ukraine was main supplier of Crimea by the water resources, and after there were some problems emerged related to the transportation of the fresh water by pipes towards by the appropriate systems towards the Crimea. Do you have any information about it or not? And
yeah. Thank you for all questions, and starting with Mr. Gonchar, if you could remind just in short your question. I didn't indicate.
Prediction
yeah.
Trans-Black Sea projects.
In year 2014. Europe, NATO, and Europe, Eastern European countries already had different experiences with Russia, but no one was predicting armed conflict, and in armed conflict in this extent, right? So it's very, very difficult to predict irrational actions. What we can do, we try to track sequence of different events, like informative notes, propaganda, together with targeting on particular, let's say, minorities in particular country. And this is part of answer to your question. It's very difficult to simulate or model behavior of this great country, which raises issues for their neighbors. But what we try to do, and even task of this study, which we call Ukrainian study, is to learn if there are national minorities in some regions in former Soviet Union countries. We pay attention what kind of influence is made by Russian mass media on minorities, and how can we engage minorities into our efforts. So this is lesson identified and lesson learned. On the other hand, we had challenges with oil supply. Several times it was disrupted. That's why Lithuania built the terminal next to our refinery, and now we have opportunities to supply oil via sea. And Druzhba pipeline isn't the key player in our relations. And less economical arguments there are left between Baltic states and Russia, except of course gas and yeah, Lithuania has success story. We will see whether Latvia will have success story next year, 4th of April. It's up to Latvian government. But we try to learn from Ukrainian experience, from other countries' experience, because Ukrainian experience is secondary one. The primary experience was Georgian conflict. And it seems that those lessons were not learned very well. So this is about lessons learned, and the last one.
About the water supply.
Yeah, water supply. Water supply. Actually, I don't have at the moment deep knowledge in details. But this was analyzed, and there is in study which is not yet published, but will be published soon. And if you are interested, I can share it. Just give me your contacts.
From April 2014. After 1 month.
And now, how the Crimea is supplied?
Internal sources. Sorry.
Thank you, Dr. Peck.
Thank you.
Okay, we are now at our fifth talk for this panel by Martin Vladimirov from the Center for the Study of Democracy in Bulgaria, and his talk is entitled Commercial and Governance Challenges Before the Exit Routes for Caspian and Other Alternative Gas Supplies in Central and Eastern Europe.
Yeah, we are very late, so I'll try to be as quick as possible. In a way, my presentation is playing the devil's advocate to the first 2 sessions in the morning. And instead of sharing optimism about the future of the Southern Gas Corridor, which of course is a major development considering the history of dependence of the whole Southeast Europe and I would say Black Sea region on Russian energy, still we haven't seen and we haven't reached revolutionary status, so to speak, which was the initial goal of the Southern Gas Corridor. If you remember, Southern Gas Corridor had a strategic objective, and its objective was to diversify Central and Eastern European gas supply with alternative sources on a major scale. That was Nabucco. Nabucco was 31 BCM. We are left out with a much smaller version of it. And I want to say that this would prolong, in a way, the divorce that has been undergoing between Gazprom and its consumers in Central and Eastern Europe. A divorce because gas relationships are very difficult, expensive, and usually someone suffers in the end when they are ended. In this case, Russia is suffering a lot and it doesn't want to break up. So it is presenting a lot of challenges to the regions. I'll discuss some of the issues related to why the Southern Gas Corridor in its exit routes into Southeast Europe and Central Europe are problematic. And I'll focus mainly on commercial challenges, governance issues, and as a subtopic to the governance issues, I'll talk about Russian influence in Central and Eastern Europe as an impediment to diversification of supply and enabling of alternative energy sources in the region. So commercial challenges. As you see, this is a map of the exit routes from Southern Gas Corridor into Southeast Europe and beyond. And as you see, the main two pipelines are the interconnector Greece-Bulgaria, which would open the northern route towards Central Europe, and the Ionian Adriatic pipeline, which would open up the way for gas, alternative gas supply to reach the Western Balkans. While the Ionian Adriatic pipeline is still just a political concept with little meat into it and little commercial considerations, the Greece-Bulgarian interconnector has been the strategic route for exiting alternative natural gas into Central and Eastern Europe. It was, in a way, the compromise done between the US and the Shah-Deniz consortium earlier, that even if TAP is chosen instead of Nabucco, there will be some kind of an outlet for alternative gas supply to Southeast Europe. So Southeast Europe is not left alone. Well, when they thought about it, they didn't consider the difficulties, the practical difficulties in achieving this. As you see this, I'm going to skip this slide because this was discussed a lot, the contractual agreements. Let's just point out one thing. The majority of the gas would go to Italy, and it will go into a market that is very saturated, very liquid, and where prices are not a problem, and diversity is not a problem. So this gas would go to a region that is not strategically important in terms of energy security. While just a little bit more than 1 BCM of gas would actually reach regions that are currently totally supplied by one source, meaning Russia. One of the problems why these projects have not been so prominent on the agenda of government is just simply gas is not an issue, it seems, not an economic issue. If you see this graph, you see that gas supply outside of Romania makes up a very small share of final energy consumption in the countries. So literally, natural gas is not a strategic source of energy. So why do we talk so much about it? Well, because gas has much more than an economic meaning. It has much more of a political sense, especially in the Southeast European region and Central Europe. And as you see, another challenge for buying up these new quantities north from Greece along the north-south gas corridor, as we call it, is that really gas demand is pretty stagnant. And according to calculations by Booz Allen Hamilton, the consultancy, it is going to remain pretty stagnant until 2030. So this is peak gas demand, which is the important thing. Peak gas demand is really what we need to analyze when we talk about consumption, because it's when security issues become so visible. So apart from the commercial challenges, so there is not enough demand, there is not enough economic sense in many of these projects because they could not be paid out because the capital investment cannot be paid out. There are also governance challenges. One thing is that this whole region here is still largely an energy island, while most of the other parts of Europe have interconnected themselves and have created liquid spot markets, including the Visegrad countries, which were very problematic before. Southeast Europe is largely remained stuck on long-term oil index contracts that are based on politics rather than the economic sense. For example, in Central and Eastern Europe, the share of spot trading increased from just 10% in 2005 to over 60% currently, which is a major improvement. This was done because of the construction of interconnectors, the building of LNG facilities on the Baltic Sea, etc., etc. Southeast Europe, there was no development. Why? Partially because of governance difficulties and governance deficits in the management of state-owned energy companies, in the liberalization of the sectors, and in the improvement of the regulatory framework in accordance to EU law. Also, on the physical side, simply there isn't enough supply infrastructure, both in terms of consumption, so on the demand side. Storages are very, very little in Southeast Europe. Their capacity is too low to accommodate large inflows of new gas, actually coming from Azerbaijan or other sources. And interconnectors are largely not developed yet. So regulatory obstacles is probably the main reason why there hasn't been much liberalization. And without liberalization of the energy sector, of the gas sector especially, in Southeast Europe, we don't have an imperative for commercial traders to actually ship gas from Shah Deniz or from LNG ports on the Greek coast to markets across Southeast Europe or Central Europe. So without liberalizing cross-border flows, you wouldn't have any commercial interest, which is why the contractual agreements that were mentioned in the beginning are so low, just 1 BCM really. And it is, again, a long-term oil index contract, so not a spot, nothing new in the region. Inefficient corporate governance of state-owned enterprises. So in this case, a lot of the problems have been related to the fact that energy companies are not following any consistent policy. Instead of focusing on strategic issues like improving storage capacity, like linking networks between the countries, or improving energy efficiency, they have focused mostly on large-scale Russian-led projects, similarly to countries in other parts of the region, mostly in other regions like Central Asia. So in Southeast Europe, the dominant rhetoric, the dominant dynamics has been South Stream, or Turkish Stream, or Tesla. All these projects that actually don't make commercial sense in the beginning, and they don't improve energy security. Why has this been such an obstinate kind of focus of these companies? We don't have much of a rational explanation, so we assume that there is something wrong. Well, what is wrong? Usually South Stream projects like South Stream are very much driven by corruption. And in several of our studies, we have identified how well-vested companies close to the government and close to Gazprom have benefited from large public procurement contracts. And these contracts have basically driven the energy policy rather than strategy and diversification. In order to push through such large projects, we have identified tools in which Russia has captured energy policy by taking advantage of key institutions like the regulatory body, like the energy ministry, etc. IGB, on the other hand, which is the Greece-Bulgarian interconnector that needs to ship the new gas from Shah Deniz, yes, I'm concluding, Shah Deniz to Bulgaria and in the northern direction, has been delayed on a number of occasions due to bad project finance structure, which we believe was done on purpose in order to delay the project. So currently it doesn't have a sound financial standing, which means that the transmission tariff through the pipeline will be prohibitively high for any commercial gas quantities to actually reach Central Europe. That is why the project has been delayed for over a decade now. So really diversification is not happening. Also, not only because of large geopolitical issues that we discussed here, but also because of simple management problems, including very superficial feasibility studies that did not take in consideration the commercial sense of these projects, but also the fact that many of the administrators behind the project don't have any out-of-the-box ideas of how to make the project commercially viable, including by using EU financing. So in the end of the day, we got stuck with an inefficient project that could have actually opened up the market. So here we come to probably the most the latest analysis that we've done at CSD, together with the Center for Strategic and International Studies, we try to analyze, in relation to the issues that we discussed, what is the Russian economic influence in these countries? What share of the economy of countries in Central and Eastern Europe is captured by Russia? And we found out that between 10 and 25% of the economies of 5 case study countries, Latvia, Serbia, Hungary, Slovakia, and Bulgaria, have been controlled directly or indirectly by Russia. We tried to link this economic footprint with governance deficits in the countries. And we found out that in many cases, Russia has exploited systematically these governance deficits through its Russian business, through its businesses in the countries, to prevent diversification of gas supply, to prevent, for example, foreign policy directions in terms of Ukraine, or to simply exploit loopholes for its own benefit, like tax evasion, acquiring strategic assets, and pushing through projects like South Stream. And this has cost a lot. This is a graph that shows the price differential in terms of gas between average Gazprom price to Europe and the price that each of these individual countries has been paying. As you see, Bulgaria is a striking example of how Russia has been able to leverage its influence on its long-term contracts with the country. We are paying 26% more on average than other European customers do. And this problem has exacerbated some current account deficits that we have been having, and has also created a machine for siphoning money and additional funds to other activities, including ownership of media, organizing of anti-government protests, financing of political parties. So as I mentioned in the beginning, gas is not really an important issue for these economies. But yet, gas has become very political. Because of this additional revenue that Gazprom has been able to acquire through this, it has been able to capture institutions and control parties. In this way, you control decision-making. Finally, and I'm ending on this, what can be done? Well, probably the most sustainable long-term option is to liberalize the gas market in Central and Southeast Europe, not via one big pipeline, no matter whether it's called South Stream, TAP, or you name it, but through short-term spot-based trading. And the only avenue for such a market to exist is to allow massive LNG to reach the region. The problem is, and that's why I'm a pessimist, is that LNG is just too expensive. This graph shows cost of LNG coming into Southeast Europe. And unfortunately, it is still more expensive than Gazprom's gas, and it would probably remain like that in the next at least 5 years. The hope is that if we liberalize the market, integrate it better, then transmission costs, which is the major impediment, transportation costs, would go down so much that LNG could be competitive to Russia. Until then, we can't do much. And until then, we will repeat the same mantra about South Gas Corridor, how great it is and how much it has done to Europe. But actually, it has mainly a commercial goal rather than strategic, which was the original plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vladimirov. I think we have time for one question.
In your presentation there, you identified some deficiencies in energy governance, but that's what the Energy Charter does. It doesn't address all the deficiencies you identified, but what the Energy Charter really does is it protects and promotes investment in energy infrastructure. It provides routes of transit, and it provides energy efficiency. And all the countries that have been discussed, all the countries of the Caspian, of the Caucasus, of the Black Sea, of the European Union are contracting parties to that. But as I said this morning, I mean, we'll talk about this tomorrow in the presentations, but I still think it's important to be aware of the existence of the Energy Treaty and what it does. Thank you.
Okay, do we have a question here? Thank you.
Thank you for a really interesting presentation, and I would like to, address elephant in the room from your presentation. We are now sitting in Tbilisi, in Georgia, talking about the importance of South Caucasus to European energy security, as well as energy security in South Caucasus. In your perspective, can South Caucasus significantly contribute more than it has already today to European energy security? And thank you.
The simple answer is absolutely yes. But we have seen a transformation of a strategic idea in early 2000s to basically a commercial project that aims to fill up the coffers of certain private companies. So the whole objective has changed. So the paradigm has changed, and until we go back to the initial paradigm, which is bringing strategically large quantities of gas to Central and Eastern Europe, we'll be talking about the same thing all over again for years and years. This means, of course, on the upstream, we need more gas, and the truth is that I don't see much potential in any of the. Although we talk, I mean, this is probably I've been talking about Absheron. I mean, we've been talking about Absheron for the last 10 years, and I don't know how many more years would come until we get Absheron on the field. But I mean, there are a lot of problems on the upstream, but there are a lot of problems also on the downstream. First, we need to fix our own kind of institutions to allow cross-border gas flows to operate normally, like the Visegrad countries have done in the last 5 years. And then we can talk about how to bring more gas. The problem is not that we don't have gas, is to make it competitive. That is the problem. And we cannot make it competitive if the governance frameworks don't operate normally.
Thank you very much. It's been a fascinating panel. We've heard about commercial and governance issues, the effective politicization of gas. In our most recent presentation, we've heard from the NATO standpoint, practical inputs from NATO vis-a-vis energy security, as well as the sort of complexity of energy conflict using the Crimean conflict as a case. And then we've also heard from two presenters on the motives and opportunities for jihadi threats against CEI, as well as developments in terms of conflict and cooperation in the Caspian, the main obstacles, as well as some of the more recent developments in terms of agreements and cooperation. Please join me in thanking all the speakers.